everyone, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going over a fantastic holiday bag, a fantastic everyday bag to be honest. Today we are going over the Kensley Tote, and this is from Sew Your Patterns. Now, let me get a better hold of this. This is the first time we featured a pattern from Sew Your Patterns on the channel. They have a few patterns that are so cute, so amazing. They have one that just came out that I'm so excited about. But this is their Kensley tote, and this tote is so fantastic. I love the fact that it's a pretty basic tote, so if you want this to be a quick sew, it definitely can be. But they give you a whole bunch of other options in the pattern. So if you want to add a zipper on the top, if you want to add more pockets, if you want to add a crossbody strap, the measurements are there to help you do that. Now for this version here, you can see I have the front flap right here. I did make this flap a little bit bigger, not on purpose, pretty much on accident when I was doing something else, but I do like the little longer size of that. So I am going to walk you through that in the pattern today. I also opted for 2 magnetic snaps instead of 1. So the pattern calls for 1 magnetic snap in the center of this flap right here. I decided to go with 2 on the corners just to prevent like the rolling up on the sides. A lot of times in my bags, if I have 1 snap in the middle on a flap, the sides like to roll up. This will just prevent that. So I have 2 snaps here. I will be showing you how I do that and how I place that. And then we just have this nice slip pocket on the front. On the back of the bag, I did decide to add a zip pocket. Now, this is completely optional. You don't have to do this. The whole reason I actually decided to add this pocket is because when my mom wears the bag, she loves a zip pocket or just a small pocket that's kind of against her body, and that's where she puts her phone. So I was thinking of her whenever I added this. The pattern also says, you know, you can add this in there, and we'll be going through that today in the tutorial as well. So this is just a simple little slip pocket right here. It's a zip pocket, but we will keep the zipper open most of the time, so it's pretty much a slip pocket for us. And then this pattern has 2 handles. Now this is what the pattern calls for. This is what it walks you through. For these handles, I did use vinyl, and then I used some little strap ends right here and some rivets to connect them. They were very simple. I then decided to also include a crossbody strap, and instead of like building D-ring strap connectors and things like that, I did use some of this hardware that I've shown you before, but I'm going to show you exactly how to install this, how to work with it in the tutorial today. Okay, so let's open up the bag. When we look at the top, it has a closure, which is just a single magnetic snap. That is what I'm sticking with today. The pattern does give you measurements to build zip panels, so you can have a nice long zipper here. However, there are not instructions for doing that in the pattern. And I can walk you through that, but I do prefer you to have the written instructions in the pattern as well as the tutorial, so you don't just need one or the other. So we are just going to be doing the magnetic snaps today, and then also on the lining we have a zip pocket, and that zip pocket is not optional. That is how we turn the whole bag out in the end. So this design I just love. I love this contrasting on the bottom. I love having a little bit of contrast on the bottom, especially if you don't want to work with all vinyl. I do suggest you use some sort of a vinyl on the bottom because that's what's going to be touching things, potentially the floor, countertops, things like that. So you want something that's kind of easy to wipe down and easy to disinfect. But then for the main part of the body, if you have some quilt cotton you want to use, you can definitely do that here. I used quilt cotton here, vinyl on the top and the bottom, vinyl for the flap, and then vinyl for the handles. I used foam for the interfacing for this bag. You definitely could use some Decovil Light or maybe Decovil Heavy even, but in today's tutorial we are going to stick to this same recipe here. We're going to stick to the quilt cotton, the vinyl, and the foam. Pretty much everything you see here is what I'm going to walk you through in the tutorial today. So thank you so much to Sew Your Patterns for allowing me to use your pattern in my tutorial. I had the pleasure of meeting the designer down in Orlando recently, and it was just such a pleasure. I got to see her own bag up close and personal, and it was amazing. So if you haven't checked out Sew Your Patterns, go check them out. I'll have the link down below. I also have a discount code for you, so go stock up on some patterns. They are some adorable ones. We will be featuring more on the channel. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, anything at all, leave them down in the comments section. I will have timestamps for every single step of this tutorial. It is a bit of a longer tutorial just because I really want to walk you through all the steps and all the little changes and things that I've made as well. This is one of those bags, like I said, you can make it pretty quickly and pretty easily, by just sticking with the basics. But then if you want to change it up, if you want to do the strap, if you want to change up how you do this, you could do a turn lock here. There's a lot of little tweaks you can make to this bag to make it really custom, and those will take a little bit more time. So I do want to show you some of the tweaks, but I won't show you all of them today. All right, guys, let's get started. So for the exterior, you're gonna need at least 1 yard of material. I'm actually gonna use 3 different types of material today. I'm gonna use some quilt cotton for like the center of the bag, just like I did in my first bag. And then for the top and the bottom and some of the accents, I'm gonna use this fun vinyl. This is like a white iridescent, almost gator-like vinyl. And then for the straps, I'm actually gonna use this black vinyl. I know I'm mixing it up a lot, but I like to mix materials. It's also nice because I don't always have enough material for everything. Since I am doing the crossbody strap, I'm actually using a pre-made strap. I'm not using any vinyl or anything today. So this pre-made strap is what I'll be using for the crossbody. I'll also be using 2 different materials for the lining today. For the zipper pockets and also for the top accent, I'll be using this beautiful quilt cotton right here. But then for the body of the lining, the bottoms of the lining, I'm gonna use some waterproof canvas just to give the bag a little bit more structure. You're gonna need at least 1 yard of lining material. So your interfacing really depends on what you're using. If you're using a lot of vinyl, you're not gonna use a whole lot of woven interfacing. Since I am using quite a bit of quilt cotton on the exterior and also the lining, I am using this Sofuse here. This is a woven interfacing. It's great for quilt cotton. It just beefs it up a little bit and prevents it from fraying or stretching. I would have at least 2 yards of this for this project. And then to give the bag structure, I'm gonna be using this foam. This is Soft and Stable by Annie. You're going to want at least ½ a yard of this. We're gonna cut this out later after we've built our exterior panel pieces. You could also use Decoville Light or even Decoville Heavy for this. So here's all the hardware I'll be using. I'll be doing 2 zippers today, so I'm gonna need 2 10-inch long zipper cuts from my zipper tape. I'm using number 5 zipper, so then I have 2 zipper pulls to go with that. For the crossbody strap, I do have these 2 1-inch, these are like strap connectors, and what they do is they go on the edge of the bag after it's done. I'm gonna show you how I install these. It can be a little tricky, so I'm gonna walk you through that, but this is kind of an easy way to add strap connectors to a bag once it's already done. So if you don't wanna like put it in the seams, you know, the seams here get pretty thick around the top, so I didn't wanna add anything else to that. To go with the straps, I have 4 1-inch rectangle rings, and then to cover the raw edges of the straps, I have 4 1-inch strap ends. These are not required, you don't need these, but it is a nice little accent. I'm also going to be using rivets today, so I have a bunch of these medium-sized rivets from M-Line Bags, and then I'll be using magnetic snaps with my Cam Snap rivet press. So these are actual magnetic snaps that end up looking like rivets on the back. Now we're not going to see this in this project, but it does keep the back of the magnetic snaps very smooth, so you don't have to worry about those prongs ripping into your lining at any point. All right, I know we have a lot of other stuff today. First, my Cam Snap press. I love this thing. This is what I'm going to use to press the rivets as well as my magnetic snaps. Next, I have some tape. This is 1/2 inch double-sided leather tape. It is very, very strong. It is very useful when working with waterproof canvas and those inset zippers. Then I have 1/4 inch wash-away tape. This is much easier to work with, and this is great for installing the zippers. I also have some duct tape because you never know. For the bobbin thread today, I am using this Joann's Gutermann thread. And then my needle of choice today is a Schmetz Microtex 9014 needle. To help reduce some of the bulk around the top edge when I'm doing the crossbody strap connectors, I do have this little pressing set here. This is a lot of times used with key fobs, but I'm gonna use this to help press the seams nice and tight to fit in my strap connectors. I always have a lighter when I'm working. It's great for burning off ends of threads. My Kai scissors, Beacon 3-in-1 glue is great. I have a bowl full of clover clips as well as a seam ripper stiletto and then just a regular stiletto and this little press on the end of it to help press down seams. For my marking tools, I have a pen, I have a chalk marker and a fabric marker. I also have a vinyl marker. And then scraps of foam, Decoville Light, fusible fleece, maybe even vinyl, just some scraps to help with installation of the magnetic snaps. If you're using quilt cotton today, some of your material is going to be a little thin, and you don't want to install heavy-duty hardware on thin material because the material will rip over time. So you want to beef it up a little bit. So I'm going to show you that. Then I have my dies that go with my magnetic snaps. My thread today is this Wizardry Stitchery Tex 45 weight thread. It is a little big for domestic machines. If you want to use something like this, maybe start out with the Tex 35. I'll have links down below. And then to install these strap connectors, I do have a small set of like eyeglass screwdrivers. So most of the pattern pieces we're using are rectangles. So you don't need to cut out all the pattern pieces and then trace them on your fabric, unless that's just easier for you. On page 5, she does list all of the cuts for everything. So let's just go through that. First, we have our handles. I'm using 2 black pieces of vinyl for the handles. Then we have the strap connectors. These are going to be connecting the handles to the rectangle rings. Next, I have 4 cuts of my lining zipper pocket panels because I am doing 2 zippers. You don't need 4 cuts. If you're just doing 1 zipper, just get 2 cuts. Even for the extra zipper on the exterior of the bag, you could make this one long cut if you'd like instead of 2 cuts, but I'm just gonna walk you through the same process both times. And then I have 2 cuts of my zipper facing, again, because I'm doing 2 zippers. Next up is 1 cut of my exterior back. This is quilt cotton and it is interfaced with my woven interfacing. And then I have my 2 cuts of my lining bottom. This is waterproof canvas, not interfaced with anything. All right, so we have pattern pieces A, B, and C. A is going to be the top exterior strips of the bag. This is vinyl for me, so it doesn't have any interfacing on it. Pattern piece B is going to be the front pocket, so that slip pocket on the front. You're gonna need 1 cut of exterior fabric as well as 1 cut of lining. Both of these are quilt cotton and they're both interfaced with the woven interfacing. Next is pattern piece C, which is your front exterior pocket back. So pretty much this pocket's gonna go right over this, right? This is the back of the pocket. This is also my exterior fabric quilt cotton with the woven interfacing. All right, next we have pattern piece D, and this is the one template that I think you should print out because it does have some angles on here. So pattern piece D, I have an exterior piece of material, this is my vinyl, as well as a lining piece. Now remember, whenever you put these together and you flip it up, your lining piece is gonna be kind of upside down. So think about the placement of that. I am using the same exterior fabric, but you could also use a lining fabric here. Since this is quilt cotton, this piece here is interfaced with the woven interfacing. Pattern piece E, you're gonna need 2 cuts of this. This is your exterior material, quilt cotton, woven interfacing. Pattern piece F, this is the base of the bag. This is the bottom of the bag. So you're gonna need 2 cuts of this. This for me is vinyl. I do suggest you use something other than quilt cotton for the base of the bag, just because that's what's gonna be touching the floor, the table, the counters, everything a lot. You want something that's easy to clean, you know what I mean? And then the last is pattern piece G. These are the top accent pieces of the lining panel. So this kind of peeks up on the top on the inside of the bag. So let's just get these straps out of the way to begin with. I'm only gonna be building the handles. If you are using a crossbody strap and building it yourself, you're gonna do the same thing here with the crossbody strap. So I took my straps and I marked a midpoint line along the back of them going horizontally. So if you're using quilt cotton, you want to do this, but you can even do this with vinyl. What you can do first is you can fold in these short edges by about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch. Fold them in first like that, press it if you can. And then when we fold the strap in, you don't have any raw edges anywhere. Since I am using those little cute strap ends, I am going to just leave these straps raw. Also with vinyl and cork, you can just leave them raw and that's it. You don't have to cover them with anything if you don't want. But what I'm gonna use are some clips instead of tape here. And I'm just gonna fold these long raw edges, wrong sides together up to meet that midpoint line. And I'm gonna do this on both sides of each strap. So once you have both of the long edges folded in and either pressed, clipped, or taped in place, what we're gonna do now is we're just gonna fold the whole unit in half like a hot dog bun. So those raw long edges are tucked inside and we don't see them at all anymore. So you can see I'm just going down and just including both of the folds into the clips. And I'll do this for the entire strap. Okay, now depending on the type of vinyl you're using, your strap can get a little twisty. I don't know if you can see over here, but this side here is twisting up. Now is the time to correct that because when you stitch this down, it'll still be twisted. So I like to kind of just flatten it out with my fingers. And so this is my trouble spot over here. What I'll do is I'll flatten it out and then I just unclip and kind of mush it around until it's flat and then re-clip, okay? Sewing this when it's curved is not going to stop it from being curved. It will just stay curved. So what you want to do is unclip and just kind of twist it, move it around. The reason it's curling up like that is because you stretched your vinyl a little bit and you need to just let it loosen up or stretch it back to where it was. So now this is much more flat, which means the chances of my strap being nice and flat are better. So I'm going to repeat this process with my other strap. All right, so once these straps are all ready to go, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along both long edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If your vinyl is sticky, you might want to grab a piece of tape, either just regular Scotch tape, maybe this type of masking tape here, and put it on the bottom of your presser foot and just cut a hole so the needle can go through it easily. And that will prevent the presser foot from sticking to your vinyl. You could also put something down over your feed dogs. You just need to make sure you cut a hole so that your feed dogs can still grab onto the material, but the material doesn't stick to the metal plate surrounding those feed dogs. So you can see I do still have a bit of a twist to my straps, and that's just because the vinyl I'm using is sticky and stretchy. So it's hard to avoid the twist when you're sewing it. What you can do is you can flatten them out and put them underneath something heavy for a while, and that will help flatten them out. It will be okay over time. But now what I want to do is add these strap ends onto the ends of these straps. So to attach these strap ends, I have the hardware, the tiny screws that go with it, tiny screwdriver, and some glue. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say that the side with the variegated top stitching, that is the right side of my strap. And first I'm just gonna do kind of a dry fit and make sure that the shiny side without the holes is on the right side of my strap. Just kind of push it in there. It should be, if you're using vinyl, it should be a pretty snug fit. There we go. So that's how it's gonna look. That looks great. So before I put that on for good, I'm going to add a little bit of glue onto the very edge of my strap. And this can get a little messy, but you can always just wipe it down. And then I'm going to gently put this in. All right, so now that I have that strap end in there, I'm going to flip it over and grab the tiny screws and screw this in. I will tell you I am struggling with this vinyl a bit. I think this vinyl is not the best. So before I put the screw in, I'll grab a stiletto and I will just poke a hole right where the screw holes are. So there are two little holes on the back of our connector, and I'm just going to gently poke a hole through all of the vinyl, and that's just going to make it a little bit easier because I want the screws to go through the vinyl, not just push down on the vinyl. So I grab a teeny tiny screw and my screwdriver, and I'm just screwing this in all the way. All right, there we go. Since there's not going to be any force on these strap connectors, like I really don't have to worry about anybody pulling on them at any point, I'm not going to add the glue because the glue and the vinyl do not work well together. So for the rest of them, I am just going to screw this in place. But always just make sure it looks good first. There we go. And then once again, I will poke the hole using a stiletto or an awl, and then I'll screw my teeny tiny screws into those holes. So just do this for both edges of your strap if you're using these strap ends. The nice thing about these screwdrivers is that they're magnetic, so it's easy to pick up these teeny tiny screws with just a screwdriver. All right, once you have these straps completed, either with the strap ends or just top stitching, you can put them to the side. I am going to take them and fold them and put them under something heavy to try to help reduce that curve in the strap. So now let's work on our connectors. So I have my little pieces of vinyl here, and I marked a midpoint line running down the center of the back of them on the longer side. So these are not squares, so the longer edge is where we're going. And then all we have to do is fold the long raw edges, wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line, and then use some clips to hold it in place. Do this for both sides on all 4 connectors. So once you have them all clipped just like that with the raw edges in the center, we're going to take these to the sewing machine and top stitch along the folded clipped edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do this for all 4 connectors. Once you have these top stitched, grab one of your rectangle rings and just wrap this around the long edge of a rectangle ring, and then add a clip to hold it in place. Go ahead and do this for all 4 rectangle rings. And now let's just stitch an 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edges just to hold them in place like this. So once you're done with these, go ahead and set them to the side. Now I wanted to mention with this flap, I actually added an inch to the height of it. So I traced out the bottom part of the panel, but then I added an inch to the top of it. You don't have to add an inch, but I am going to kind of walk you through with the added inch. And I'm also going to be doing 2 magnetic snaps instead of just 1, because I do find with 1, the sides like to curl up a little bit. So I like to put 2 down so that everything stays really flat. So here's how I determine placement for my 2 spots for my double magnetic snaps. This is the lining piece of material, and on the very back, I measure 1 inch away from this little angled edge, and I draw a line. So I have 2 long lines here that are both 1 inch away from this angled line. I then fold along this angled line to find the midpoint and measure up to that line that's 1 inch away. And that's how I find the placement marks for my magnetic snaps. If you want to measure it another way, these spots here are about 1 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom edge, and also 1 1/4 of an inch in from the side edges. So that's where I'm going to put my 2 magnetic snaps. Because this is quilt cotton and I am installing hardware to it, I'm going to use a scrap cut of foam. So I'm just going to cut this little piece in half, and I will install the magnetic snaps through the quilt cotton and the foam so that I don't have to worry about these snaps eventually ripping the material. So we are installing the male ends of these snaps here. First thing I want to do is punch some holes. I'm just going to punch holes in the center of my foam scraps. And then I'm also going to punch holes at that intersection that I marked for placement of my magnetic snaps. So now I'm just going to take one of the male ends of my snaps, and I'm going to install it so that the male end is on the right side of my lining. And then I'm going to grab a piece of foam and add it over the back, and then grab my cap and just add it just like that. I'm going to do this for both of them. There we go. So there are my magnetic snaps, and you can see on the back here, these are just like rivets. So I don't really have to worry about this wearing down the vinyl on the other side over time. If you're using prongs here, you're going to also want to cover those prongs with some sort of woven interfacing, fusible fleece, something to protect the vinyl on the other side so it doesn't wear down the exterior material. So now I'm going to grab my press and also my die for the magnetic snaps. And I'm going to use the bottom die that looks like the female snap, and then the top die just looks like a rivet die. I'm just going to lay this in, rivet side up, and press it down. There we go. And that foam does make it a little puffy right here. If you wanted to use Decovil Light, fusible fleece, something like that so it doesn't get so puffy here, you can do that. Just something to beef it up so that it's not just pulling on the quilt cotton. So now grab your exterior flap material and lay it right side up, and then take your lining and lay it right side down, and just match up all the edges. And we're going to clip along the sides and then the shorter edge over here on the bottom of the flap. All right, now let's sew along the sides and the bottom clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, once this is sewn together, let's trim down these corners. So I like to trim down at the corners, and then I also kind of cut little slits just outside of the corners to try to help it all spread out. There we go. I'll trim down that as well. Don't forget to cut down these corners at the top also. And now let's flip it out, right side out. Okay, and if you're using all quilt cotton here, you can grab an iron and press this with an iron. Otherwise, just press it with your fingers. So I like to kind of just press it flat and roll it with my hands. And then I'll use clips to really hold that seam in place. Okay, once you have it all pressed, just take a look on both sides, make sure it looks good. And honestly, if you're using those rivet magnetic snaps, you could wait until later and then put these snaps through the front and the back, because that rivet will still look really nice on your exterior panel. So if you don't want to add the rivets to just one piece of fabric, you can wait and add them later, and that will help with placement as well. But I have it all together, And now we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to top stitch along all of the edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Because my rivet is a little close to the edge here, I might use a zipper foot. I think I'll actually be okay because it is very thin. But if you're having trouble, you don't want wonky top stitching, so maybe try using a zipper foot when you're going around those rivets. So now if you had any sort of like decorative button or anything you wanted to put on this flap, you can go ahead and do that. I think that this would be a fun pattern too if you had an embroidery machine and you wanted to do an embroidery design here. This would be a really beautiful piece of material to do that on this type of bag. So now grab your front exterior pocket panel. This is your panel B, your exterior and your lining. And you can go ahead and install the snap now if you want, but because my measurements are a little off, I added 1 inch to this, I'm gonna install that in just a moment. So first, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my 2 pieces and I'm gonna lay them right sides together, and I'm lining them up at the top. So if you have a directional print like I do, pay attention to that. And we're lining them up. We're lining all 4 edges up, but we're particularly concerned about the top edge. So I'm just going to clip these together. And now we're going to sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have those sewn together, let's press them wrong sides together. So this is quilt cotton, so I can just press both of these with an iron to get it really nice and flat. I can also grab my little By Annie stiletto tool and just give it a press like that. And I'm telling you, this works pretty well. Now I always like to add a couple clips along these press seams just to make sure I don't accidentally move it around on my way to the machine. And now I'm going to top stitch along this top edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we're going to grab the pattern piece C as well as our flap and our pocket, and then also grab a marking tool. So what we're going to do is find placement for the female ends of my snap. Now, if you're keeping the flap the same size as the pattern, you can just use the measurements that are in the pattern, but because I kind of mucked it up a little bit, I have to do it a different way. So I'm going to just line up my pocket piece that has that top seam all over there, and I'm just going to line it up on top of my pattern piece C, just like this, and this is how it's going to be in the end. This is a slip pocket here, and I'm going to find the midpoint along the top edge of my C piece, and I'm also going to find the midpoint along this top straight edge of my flap. I'm going to grab another mat here so it's a little bit easier to see these marks. There we go. So I have the midpoint marked right here on the top edge of my seam panel, and I have my midpoint on my flap, and I'm going to line those up just like this, because this is how it's going to go in the end. My flap is going to cover the center of my pocket just like this. So now I'm just adding a couple clips here to hold it in place so I don't have to worry about it moving. And now, honestly, there are a few ways you can do this. You can just push down on your snaps. These are the male ends of your snaps. When you push them down, they should cause a little indentation in your fabric. Another thing you can do is take some sort of Sharpie, or for me, I have this silver paint pen, which is used on leather and vinyl. And what you do is you flip up your flap and you just color on that little nub. So I've just coated that little male end of the snap with the silver ink, and then just lay it down and push it down, and that ink will transfer to the material underneath. All right, once you have the mark transferred, you can take everything apart, and we can just focus on this pocket panel. Now, depending on your material, it can be kind of hard to see it, but I'm gonna flip the lining out of the way because I'm not gonna have the rivets go through the lining and the exterior. I'm just gonna have my magnetic snap rivets go through this exterior piece of material here. So I'm once again gonna be using some scrap cuts of foam to help install this hardware. Once again, if you want to use a scrap piece of vinyl, a scrap piece of fusible fleece, Decovilite, something a little bit thinner, that would be great. So I punched holes through the center of these foam cuts, and now I'm going to punch holes where I marked them on just the exterior piece of material. Okay, so now let's grab the female ends of our snaps and install them here. So I'm going to install the female end so it's on the right side of my exterior, and then I'm going to attach the foam behind it, and then the snap over that, just like that. Do this for both of them. All right, and before I totally set it, I am going to just do a quick dry run here to make sure it's about right. All right, that looks good. That looks great. Perfect. So now I'm just gonna set these snaps with my rivet press. Okay, so now grab that pattern piece C and your front pocket that you just attached your snaps to. There we go. Make sure it's completely lined up on the sides and the bottom. All right, and then grab some clips and clip these together to hold in place. Okay, now we can just baste these together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have that basted down, grab your pattern pieces E. You should have 2 of these. These are your exteriors. And we're going to attach those to the sides just like this. So just take them, make sure if you have a directional print, everything is the right way, and lay them right sides together along the sides. And then just clip them right sides together. Now let's sew down these side edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have those sewn down, let's open them up and press them open. And you can grab an iron here or any sort of pressing tool to just press this down. All right, now let's top stitch along these pressed edges at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. The seams should be behind the side panels, so don't fold anything under this pocket. It's thick right there. You don't want to press that way anyways. The seams are behind the thinner side panels. So I measured my side panels a little long, so they're kind of hanging off the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a rotary cutter and a ruler, and I'm just going to trim down the tops and bottoms of my side panels because they are too big. They are bigger than they're supposed to be, just so this is all one nice clean rectangle. All right, doesn't that look great? And so now let's grab our flap and we can just attach it to the snaps. And it should be centered along the top edge here of our center panel. Isn't that cute? And this is how the center of the bag is going to be. So let's grab a few clips and just hold this flap in place. And now we can just go baste this flap in place at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next, grab 2 of your rectangle rings and strap connectors, and we're going to line them up right on the edge of the flap. So just right on the outer edge like that, so it's going to be on the flap. So line those up and clip in place. This is where things start to get bulky, okay? We're gonna still add even more to this. So these seams here start getting bulky. If you need to increase your needle to a 90 needle or maybe even a jeans needle, you might wanna increase your tension. It gets a little bulky here. So now I'm gonna baste these in place at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, once those are basted in place, we're gonna add the top and the bottom. Now just make sure you remember this because I messed this up on my first bag. The top and the bottom are different sizes, okay? So the top is piece A and the bottom is piece F. So you're gonna grab one piece A and lay that right sides together along the top. And then you're gonna take one piece F and lay that right sides together along the bottom, just like this, okay? So grab some clips and clip it all in place. All right, now let's sew on the top and bottom pieces at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, so you might have noticed that I had to go over these straps a second time. That's because when I was stitching it from the top here, my needle was having a hard time going all the way down and catching the bobbin thread, so I had some like missed stitches here. Sometimes when that happens, all you have to do is flip it over and go from the back and it will do it better. So that's what I do, I just go over it again. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to flip the flap up and also the flap for the pocket. We're gonna flip all of it up as well as these little strap connectors here, just like that. And now we're gonna top stitch on this middle panel here. So we're not gonna top stitch on this white panel on top. We're gonna top stitch on the middle panel and we're gonna top stitch underneath the flap. So everything should look just like this. The seam is going behind the thinner material, which should make this a little easier for us. All the bulk is right here. We should be able to get through that without too much problem. So let's just work on that first. Let's just top stitch right along this middle panel at an 1/8 inch seam allowance away from the seam, and then we'll do the bottom. All right, so that worked out much better. That top stitching was very easy. So now we can just take our pocket and pull it down just like that. And I know it does kind of pull on this. That's okay. You can press it with your fingers. Once we finish the bag, this pulling is going to be fine because this is all going to be stitched in place anyways. So now for the bottom panel, we're going to flip the bottom panel down, and the seam is going to go behind the bottom panel. So just give it a good press. And now let's take this to the sewing machine and let's top stitch on the bottom panel 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. All right, so now the next thing I'm going to do is attach my bag tag. Now I forgot to show my bag tag when I was showing the materials, and typically I would attach it down here in the bottom of the pocket, but I forgot. So we're going to attach the bag tag up here on the top, which I think will still look nice. I'm going to attach it at about 1/2 of an inch above the top of my pocket flap here. And to help hold all this together, I'm going to grab some double-sided tape and just tape this tag down. All right, there we go. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to top stitch along all 4 edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, and when I do bag tags, I leave the tails of the threads like that. I don't back stitch, and I flip it over, and then I pull on the bobbin thread until I see that top thread, and I'll just use a stiletto to kind of pull it through to the back. So I'll do this for both bobbin threads and top threads. So now I have 4 tails back here, and then I just double them up and double knot it, double or triple knot it. Just gives it a cleaner finish on the front to not have that back stitching. All right, so here's where we're at. The last thing we have to do to prepare this front panel is we're going to box these bottom corners. So you're going to measure in 2 inches from the side and 2 inches from the bottom, and you're going to create a little square, a little 2 inch by 2 inch square, and then you're going to cut that square out. So I like to draw it first and then use scissors to cut it out. All right, there you go. Your front panel is now done. I know you might be tempted to rivet right now, but don't rivet yet. If you have these like I do, don't rivet this just yet. We'll rivet this in just a moment. So now we're going to work on the back exterior, and this can be really quick or a little bit longer depending on what you decide to do with it. But first what we want to do is baste on our strap connectors. Now we're going to baste these on 4 1/8 of an inch in from the sides. So the outermost edge is going to line up with that 4 1/8 of an inch mark. So do this for both of them. And now let's baste these in place at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next, grab your top exterior piece, which is pattern piece A, and we're going to lay that along the top edge where our connectors are and just fold it right side down and clip in place. So now we're just going to sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So once again, I was struggling with skip stitches over those strap connectors, so I just flipped it over and then sewed from the back, and it was fine. So whatever works, right? So now you're going to flip up the top and the strap connectors. Everything's going to go up, and that seam is going to go down behind the middle panel here. And just give it a good press, either with an iron, just be careful with vinyl, or just with your fingers. There we go. And now we're going to top stitch along the bottom panel 1/8 of an inch away. We're just top stitching that seam in place. All right, so now I'm going to add a zip pocket on the back here, and pretty much just because when my mom wears bags, she likes to have an exterior zip pocket that goes against her body that she can put her phone in, and just anything she needs to grab quickly, she likes to have that against her body. So this is pretty much my mom's cell phone pocket. So the first thing I want to do is find the midpoint along this seam. So I'm just going to fold it in half. And I'm going to use a chalk pencil. Just use something you can erase. If you have vinyl, just use your vinyl marker as long as you can erase it. There we go. Just something that won't last forever on that midpoint. And now I'm going to grab one of my zipper facing panels. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure 1 inch up from the bottom, 1 inch down from the top, and 1 inch in from each side. And we're just going to mark all those lines. Once I have those 4 lines marked, now I have this inner rectangle, and I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark right along the center of that inner rectangle, and then I'm going to make these little triangles that come from the corners to that center line. All right, so I have my rectangle marked with my triangles and everything like that, and now what I want to do is find the midpoint along the top edge of my zipper facing. So I'm just going to fold it in half. And I don't have any interfacing at all on my zipper facing, so I have to be careful here because I can stretch it. I'm just going to clip the top like that. And now I'm going to grab my back panel, and I'm going to take my facing and I'm going to lay it right side down on the right side of my back panel. And I'm going to match this up with that midpoint I marked right here in the seam. And I'm actually just lining it up right along the top stitching line. You can line it up right along the edge or top stitching line. I'm just going to do the top stitching line just like that. So now I'm going to grab some masking tape and I'm going to tape down the ends of this just to hold it in place. You could also use pins here if you'd like. Pins, actually let's use pins. Since this is all quilt cotton, we can use pins. So I'm just gonna pin this facing in place with my exterior panel. And now we're gonna go to the sewing machine, and I'm gonna sew along the long edges only. So starting here in this top left corner, I'm gonna sew along this long edge, and I'm gonna backstitch at the beginning and the end. I'm not gonna sew along the short edges because you don't really need to. So I'm just gonna do that on the top and bottom long edges. Again, make sure you backstitch both times. Okay, so once you have this sewn on, grab a seam ripper and rip right along that center mark line. Now you're ripping through the facing and the exterior panel. There we go. And you just rip enough so that you can fit your scissors into that hole, and then cut along that center line until you get to the tip of those triangles you made, and then cut off towards the corner of your stitching. There we go. You try to get as close as possible to the stitching without cutting it. And then you can do the same thing on the other side of that opening. And now since this is all quilt cotton that I'm using here, I am going to iron this. So what we want to do is just push the facing through to the back. All right, so let's pull the facing around. So I just work on one edge at a time. I know it's tempting to do the whole thing at once, but then it gets kind of frustrating because it just keeps folding back on itself. So I just pick one long edge to do first, and I finger press it, and then I grab my iron and I press it like that. And I'm pressing it on the back so that I don't get the vinyl with my iron. I can get the iron on the back of the vinyl, that's fine. All right, so I have one edge done, so now I'm just gonna flip the other long edge over. And I like to finger press it first. And then I'll grab an iron to help press it down. And once I have the two long edges done, then I'll kind of go and just clean it all up. I'll pull on the sides to spread out those corners. Okay, now let's flip it over and look at the front. I'm just gonna roll that facing back some more so we don't really see it. To help with that, if you don't want to see the lining, just make sure your facing fabric is the same fabric as your exterior fabric. And that way, if it rolls to the front a little bit, you don't really notice that it's, you know, a different piece of fabric. Okay, so we can put this to the side for just a moment. So now grab two of your zipper pocket panels, some zipper tape, and a zipper pull. And for my zipper tape, I like to just make it a little bit longer than the pocket panels, and then I'll trim it down later. So make sure you attach your zipper pull, and take one of your lining panels and lay it right side up, and take your zipper and lay your zipper right side up, and with the zipper closing, it's gonna go to the right. And let's just line it up with that top edge. So both of them are right sides up. Just clip along that top edge. And now using a zipper foot, let's sew along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, once that one's attached, grab your other lining panel and lay it right side up, and then take your panel with the zipper, rotate it so that the raw edge of the zipper is on the top, and just line that up with the top edge of the other lining panel. Now, if your zipper tape is longer like mine is, just make sure you're lining up the zipper panels on the side. Don't line it up like that. You know what I mean? They need to be the same on the side. So just carefully line them up and clip them together. So the zipper tape is right side up, and the lining panel that is not sewn is right side up, and your other lining panel is right side down. All right, now let's sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so now they're both attached, so you see when you have the zipper up like this and you open it, you'll see the lining right side on the inside. One thing that makes this type of zipper attachment just a little bit easier is to spread out your lining panels just like this. You can press this with your iron if you like. And what we're gonna do now is we're just going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edge of our zipper tape through the lining panel that it goes with. So the lining panels are separated, and then we'll just stitch the zipper down 1/8 of an inch away from the edge to their lining panels, and that flattens this out really nicely. So when we attach it to the back panel, we don't have to fight this seam. There we go. Now this is nice and flat. If your zipper tape is longer than your zipper lining panels, you can go ahead and trim it down now so it's all just one big rectangle. Now grab some of your double-sided tape, and we're going to attach it to the zipper tape, but make sure it doesn't cross in beyond the stitching closest to the teeth. So don't have it go past the stitching closer to the teeth. Just keep it on the outer edge of that inner stitching. Okay, so now when the zipper is closed, it's going to go to the left. That's how I prefer it. And we're going to lay this zipper right side up. Take your back panel right side up and lay it on top of your zipper tape. And when you fold up the sides, the zipper facing should be matched up with the edges of your lining. So I need to move mine over to the right a little bit. There we go. So the zipper facing is the same width as your lining panels. Get that matched up and then start rotating this down and try to get the zipper teeth centered in that little rectangular opening. You might have to finagle this a bit, mess with it. That's okay, just take your time here. All right, once you have it the way you like it, I'm just gonna fold down the top first, remove the paper from that double-sided tape, and then fold the top back and just stick it to that tape. And make sure you're covering those 1/4 inch stitches along your zipper tape. You shouldn't have any stitches showing on the zipper tape. So push that one down, and now let's flip up the bottom and do the same thing. Remove the paper, gently push everything down over that bottom. So I'm going to pull it up a little bit. There we go. And this type of tape is not permanent tape. If you need to lift it up and redo it, that's fine. It's not going to cause any problems. All right, there we go. So I'm going to pull my zipper all the way to the left, make sure it's all straight enough. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to top stitch around all 4 edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. My lining panels are split open, so I don't have to worry about closing anything here. The lining panels are coming out the top and the bottom. All right, so now the zipper is stitched in place. Let's flip this over. And what I do is I'm going to take the top lining panel and I'm going to fold it down right sides together with the bottom lining panel. And you can see when I do that, I have excess bottom lining panel. So I'm just going to flip this out of the way. The exterior is going to go out of the way. There we go. You don't have to flip it so much that it's hard to keep everything flat. And just remember, this is a pocket panel. None of this has to be perfect. But I'm going to grab a cutting mat and a ruler and my rotary cutter. And I am just going to use my ruler to match up with this top edge here, and I'm just going to cut down this excess lining pocket panel on the bottom. All right, so now my lining panels match up. So while I have them nice and flat together, I'm going to clip along the sides and the bottom. Now, for the lining one of these, we are going to leave the bottom open, but since this is the exterior, we're not going to be pulling anything through this. We're going to close the bottom. Okay, so now when we're going to sew this, we're going to sew it with the exterior right side up, and we're going to flip it out of our way. So we're just going to flip this panel out of their way, and we're going to go down the sides and the bottom and sew around the whole thing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, there we go. Now we have a nice little zip pocket on the back of our bag. It's a little bit of extra work, but it's one of those things where the more you do this, the quicker it gets, the easier it gets. It's good practice. So now let's grab our last F pattern piece, which is the bottom, and we're going to line that up, flip it right sides together with the bottom edge of the back panel, and clip together. Now let's sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once that's stitched in place, fold your bottom exterior panel down and give it a good press. And I know it naturally wants to go up behind that middle panel because there's thinner fabric there, but we want it to go behind the bottom panel. And take this back to the sewing machine and just top stitch along the bottom panel an 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, making sure you're getting that seam underneath it. I forgot to record that, I apologize, but it was just like the front. So now, just like the front, we're going to flip this over and we're going to take our ruler and measure in 2 inches from the side and 2 inches from the bottom. So we have a nice little 2-inch square on the bottom of each corner, and we're going to cut those out. All right, there we go. Now the back panel is done. So now we're going to use these panels to cut out our foam. So you can see I have some soft and stable here. And what you want to do is open up your foam and lay it flat. And to the best of your ability, maybe try to line it up with the edge or a corner somewhere. And we're just going to use these panels as our pattern pieces. So you can see I have it lying flat on my foam, and all I'm going to do is go around and just trace it. Now it doesn't have to be perfect. It's even okay if your foam is a little bit bigger, because we can trim it down after we baste it in place. Just do your best to get this foam around the same size as your panel. All right, there we go. So I traced my back panel on my foam. And now I'm going to grab my front panel and I'm going to see if it's about the same size. It should be. They should be the same size. Yes, these are pretty much the same size. Okay, so I'm going to cut out this foam piece and I'm just going to use that cutout piece as my template for the next one. So I'm just going to line this up. I try to, you know, use as little waste as possible. Sometimes it's hard to do. And now I'll just trace this foam for my other foam cut, since they are the same size, which they're supposed to be. They should be the same size. So now I have 2 foam cuts and my front panel and my back panel. So take one of your foam cuts and one of your panels and just lay your panel on top of the foam. Try to get it all matched up to the best of your ability. Grab some clips and clip it together. Now I like to start on these bottom corners and then I'll work my way up to the top and the sides. All right, so just do this for both the front and the back panels. Once you have them clipped together, let's take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna baste the foam onto the back of these panels at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have these base stitched together, just make sure they're about the same size. I know for mine, I had to trim off the side just a little bit, but now that they're the same size, I am going to add the rivets. So this is why I said to wait, because I'm gonna rivet through the bottom of the strap connector because it is a little loosey-goosey here. I'm gonna rivet through the bottom of it, but I want it to go through this panel and also through the foam. That's gonna provide a lot of support for that rivet. So first I'm going to just look at it and find a center point on each of my strap connectors. And I'm just marking that with my vinyl marker. Now I'm gonna grab my hole punch and I'm just gonna punch through. I'm punching through the strap and the top panel and the foam. So just try to keep everything nice and flat while you do this. And I'm just gonna punch the holes through all 4 of my connectors. So now that I have my holes punched, I'm gonna grab my rivets and I'm just gonna snap these rivets through those holes. And there we go. Now that they're all in there, I can just grab my rivet press and I need to put on my rivet die. And now I can just press these rivets down to hold everything in place. And there we go. Now our front and back panel are good to go. So let's go ahead and finish this exterior. So take your front and back panel and lay them right sides together, matching up all of the edges, and then just use some clips to clip them together. I like to clip at the seams between the top panel and the middle panel, and then also between the top panel and the bottom panel first, because we want those seams to match up on the front and the back so the sides look really nice. And then I'll just clip everywhere else. So now once you have everything clipped, we're gonna sew along the sides and the bottom at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch well at the beginning and the end each time. You do not have to sew inside of these. You're gonna just go off the edge, backstitch right here, and then start over here, backstitch. I'm gonna go over all of these stitches twice. Once you have the sides and the bottom all stitched together, let's box these corners. So you're gonna fold your exterior and kind of pull along the bottom here in the middle. And let's just pull these 2 side seams, the bottom seam and the side seam, let's pull them together, and you can open them if you'd like, or you can twist one in one direction, one in the other direction. I know it gets a little bulky if you're using vinyl here. Grab a clip and hold that together, and then just clip along the side as well. This is how we're gonna box these bottoms, so we have a nice flat bottom. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now let's go sew along these two box bottom edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once again, you might want to go over this twice. Alrighty, once you're done with that, let's turn this right side out. Alright, that's how it's looking. I think that looks adorable. Isn't that cute? So this gives you a good idea of how your bag is going to look in the end. I love that. Okay, let's set this to the side. So now let's work on our lining panels. So grab both of your lining bottom pieces and your lining top pieces. Take one of your lining bottom pieces and lay it right side up with the top on the top. And then take one of your lining top pieces and you're going to just line it up on top like that and then fold it down right sides together. If you were adding a zipper here, this is where you would do it. You would install it between these two panels here. But like I said, since the instructions for building that are not in the pattern, I'm not going to show you how to do that today. Do the same thing with your other lining bottom and top. Now let's sew along both of these clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Alright, so once you have these sewn together, you're going to press up on your seam and separate these so they're both right sides out. And the pattern has you put the seam behind the bottom piece. So if you wanted to put the seam behind the top piece, I think you'd be okay. But the pattern does have the seam behind the bottom piece. So go ahead and press that, and then we'll top stitch along this bottom edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just making sure we catch that seam in there. So now grab one of your lining pieces to install the zipper. So just like we did on the exterior, we're going to install a little zipper right here. So first thing I want to do is find the midpoint right along that seam. And I'm just going to mark that with a chalk pencil. And then I'm going to grab my zipper lining pocket panels and my zipper facing. And on the back of my zipper facing, I'm going to measure in 1 inch from the bottom, 1 inch from the top, and 1 inch from the sides and create a little inner rectangle. Once you have that rectangle marked and you have your midpoint line and your little triangles that are going to point towards that midpoint line, find the midpoint of your facing on the top side by just folding it, and you can mark that midpoint with a pen or you can grab some scissors and create a little snip. Now grab your lining panel that has the midpoint marked on the seam, take your facing and lay your facing right side down, matching up the midpoint on the facing with the midpoint on your lining panel. And I just line it up just below the top stitching line. For this one, I'm going to use masking tape to hold this in place. And now I'm going to stitch along just the long edges of my inner rectangle. So not all the way to the edge, just this inner rectangle right here. And I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and the end each time. Once that's stitched in place, grab your seam ripper and start ripping right along that center line, and you're cutting through the lining and the facing. And you rip just enough so that you can get your scissors in there, and your scissors can finish cutting the center line, and then stop once you get to the tip of that triangle, and then just go off the edge to get to the corner of your rectangle. Get as close to your stitching as possible, and then do the same for the other side. And now you're just going to take your facing and flip it through that hole so that it's wrong sides together with the back of the lining. Now I'm using waterproof canvas here, which means this is a little hard to keep in place. So to help with this, I could iron, but ironing doesn't always help a ton with waterproof canvas. So this is where I grab that super, super sticky tape. And I'm going to add this tape just to the very edge of my facing, just like that. I don't want to get it too close to the inner pocket or that little inner rectangle because I don't want to sew over this. So I just put this tape on the very edge, remove the paper, and then I'll fold it back with my fingers and tape it down. And that's just because the waterproof canvas is so stiff, it's hard to keep it folded over without the help of some tape. And I found that masking tape wasn't quite strong enough. So I do it just like that, and I'm gonna do the same thing on the other long edge. So I'm just gonna pull out that long edge, and on the back of it, I'll add my super sticky double-sided tape. Sometimes it's easier to do it in pieces rather than one long strip. So then once again, I'll remove the paper and then just use my fingers to press that seam back and tape it down. All right, there we go. It's not the prettiest, but that's okay. It's a lining pocket. Let's look at it from the front. The front looks okay. So then for these short edges, just to keep those down, I will use masking tape because those are a little bit easier to keep down. Okay, so the lining panel is ready to go. Let's put that to the side. Now grab your lining pocket panels. You should have 2 of them. Grab your zipper tape and a zipper pull. And once again, I'm just gonna cut my zipper tape so it's a little bit longer than my lining panels. And then I'll just add my zipper pull. Now take one lining panel and lay it right side up. Take your zipper and lay it right side up, and when the zipper is closed, it's gonna be going towards the right. Go ahead and clip this along the top edge. So both zipper and lining panel are right sides up. And then let's sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then grab your remaining lining zipper pocket panel and lay it right side up. Take your zipper unit and flip it around so the raw edge of the unsewn side of the zipper is facing right side up, just like that. We're going to attach it to the top edge of the zipper pocket. Make sure the sides are lined up and then line up the top. Once you have all that laid out, go ahead and clip it together. And now let's sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And like I did with the back pocket, I'm going to flip my lining panels out. So you see when I spread this out, the back of the lining panel should be facing up, but then the right side of the zipper should be facing up. And I'm going to get it nice and flat. And then I'm just going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edge of my zipper. And I'm stitching the zipper down to its respective lining panel. So now that that zipper is in place, we can trim down our zipper tape so that it's the same width as our lining panels. And then grab some double-sided tape. And we're going to add this double-sided tape along the very edge of the zipper, but it's not going to cross the stitches towards the zipper teeth. So we don't want this tape to be seen in the end. So we're keeping it outside of that 1/4 inch seam right here. So now I'm going to rotate my panel so that when the zipper is closed, it's going towards the left. And then I'm going to grab my lining panel, and I'm going to lay it right over my zipper, just like that. And I'm going to check the sides to make sure. I can remove some of this tape. But I want to make sure that the facing lines up with the very edge of my panels and my zipper. It should be the same width on both sides. So then just center it over your teeth, making sure you're covering up all of the stitching. And once you have it where you want it, like to flip the bottom down, remove the paper from the tape, and then flip it back and just tape it down. Now flip up the bottom and do the same thing. Remove the paper and flip the bottom back down and tape it down. Make sure you get that zipper pull out of the area. Here we go. All right, once you're happy with it, we're going to take this to the machine and top stitch around all 4 edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that your lining panels on the back are spread out. Okay, they're totally spread out, just like that. Now let's flip it over so we're looking at the back. Take that top lining panel and press it down, just like this. So the top lining panel is not going to reach the bottom. That's fine. And what you can do is just give it a good press with your iron or just finger press it, but then move this bottom lining out of the way. Grab yourself a ruler and a rotary cutter and just trim down this extra piece of lining right here so that they end up being the same size. Now let's clip along these sides here. And I'm clipping the facing, the zipper, and the 2 lining panels that are there. Down here on the bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold this edge up anywhere between 1/4 of an inch and 3/8 of an inch. Just fold it up just like that. Just make sure you fold them in the same direction. You can press this with an iron if you want, but you don't need to. And now we're going to go to the sewing machine. I'm going to flip this over. And we're going to pull back the lining panel, and we're going to sew down the side at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Keep this bottom edge folded over and just backstitch really well here. This hole on the bottom of your zipper pocket is where we're going to turn the whole bag through. So you're going to do this for the right side and the left side. All right, there you go. Now I would open this at least halfway now just while you're here so you don't forget. So now let's flip this over and grab yourself a ruler and a marking tool, and you're gonna measure 2-inch squares on the bottom corners of both of your lining panels. So we're gonna measure 2 inches from the side and 2 inches from the bottom. Just mark that and then use some scissors to cut out 4 of those corners. Once you have those 2-inch squares cut out of the bottom 4 corners of your lining, take your 2 lining panels and lay them right sides together. And just match up all the side edges and the bottom edge as well as those boxed bottoms. And then grab some clips and clip along the sides and the bottom edges. I like to make sure I'm lining up the seams at the top first, and then I'll line up everything else. Once you have these edges clipped, take this to the sewing machine and sew along the sides and the bottom at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have the sides and the bottom stitched together, now we're just going to box these bottom corners. So take your lining panels in the middle and just pull them apart. I find if you pull it from the center apart, it makes it easier. And then you're going to take that bottom seam and side seam and match them up right sides together, and then just flip the seams in opposite directions. So that way they just kind of fold over and hug one another. And then grab a clip and clip right there in the center, and then clip out towards the edges. Go ahead and repeat this for the other box corner. There we go. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew along both of these short edges at a little bit bigger of a seam allowance. I'm going to sew them at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that helps just to reduce the bagginess of the lining. Alright, so the last step for the lining is attaching the magnetic snaps that go on the inside of the bag. So first what you want to do is find your midpoints on the top edge of your lining panels. So for that you can just fold these in half so that those side seams meet one another, and then just pull on it so you can find the midpoint of each side panel. And I'm just going to use some scissors to clip a teeny tiny triangle on the top. Do this for both of them. And you can flip this right side out if it makes it easier for you. When you do that, just pull on the side seams and make sure your midpoint marks are at the same spot. Alright, those look good. And for my magnetic snaps, I'm once again going to be using these magnetic snap rivets. So using that midpoint that you marked on the top of your lining panel, measure down 1 3/8 of an inch, and then mark a dot for placement of your magnetic snap. There we go. Do the same on the other lining panel. And as you can see, I have a couple pieces of my foam interfacing. I'm going to use that to help beef this up. Since this is just quilt cotton with some woven interfacing on it, it does need a little bit more support on the back. So now I'm going to grab my rivet press that has the hole punch on it, and I'm going to punch holes in each of my foam interfacing scraps. And then I'm also going to punch a hole on those marked dots on my lining panels. Just make sure you move the other lining panel out of the way when you do this. So now take one of your magnetic snaps, I don't think it matters if it's the male or the female end, and place that so that the snap part is on the right side of the fabric. And if you're using these rivets, just make sure you put the rivet on the back. But first, add your foam. So foam layer and then the rivet cap. If you're doing the prongs, you'll just do the same thing, except you'll just push the prongs back here. If you are doing magnetic snaps with prongs, I do suggest you put a piece of SF101 or woven interfacing or fusible fleece, something over the back of those prongs so that they don't rub against the exterior material. And then add the opposite magnetic snap on the other lining panel. And grab your foam and your cap or washer and just install it like that. Now I've got my rivet press and my dies for my magnetic snaps, and I'm just going to press these one at a time. So I put the male side down, the rivet side up, and just give it a good press. And then all you have to do is switch out the bottom die when you're going to do the female side. Alright, so we can turn this back wrong side out. I kind of want to see what it looks like. And whenever we snap these shut, it all lines up nicely. Perfect. Alright, so your lining should be wrong side out, and make sure you have these unsnapped and open that zipper pocket in the lining all the way. You need that open. And then grab your exterior, and your exterior should be right side out, and we're gonna insert the exterior into the lining so that they're all right sides together. If you have a preference on which side this zip pocket is, think about that now. I'm gonna have the zip pocket go against the back panel, so I'm just gonna line it up like that. And push, it's a tight fit. Your lining might be a little bit smaller than your exterior, so make sure you really shove in that exterior. Don't worry about keeping it straight or flat or anything like that. Before I get all this pinned together, to help with the install of the strap connectors later, I'm going to trim down this corner right here of my exterior fabric. So I'm going to move the lining out of the way, just going to pinch this corner, and I'm trimming down at a 45-degree angle, so just a little triangle, and I'm not trimming the stitches, I'm just trying to reduce the bulk here. So I'm going to do this with both of these top corners. There we go. So now I'm going to line up the top edges of my lining and my exterior, matching up those side seams first, and then adding a clip. There you go. Do this for the other side as well. So then you can match up the midpoints on the top of the exterior and the lining panels, if that helps. And then you can just clip around this entire edge, clipping the exterior and the lining right sides together. All right, now we're just going to sew along this top clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. When I sew this, I like to wrap it around the arm of my sewing machine, so I do take the bed off of my sewing machine to do this. So once you're done stitching this on, you can see I'm trimming down the seam allowance on the top. I'm trimming it in half, but you can just trim it down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you're doing the side connector hardware like I am to do the crossbody strap after this, you do want these right here to be as thin as possible because it gets pretty bulky. So whatever you have to do to kind of thin this out, go ahead and do that. So I'm even trimming down the lining just a little bit. All right, once you're all done, you can flip the whole bag through the opening in that zipper pocket. So just be careful here, you don't want to rip your zipper. You're gonna pull the bag through that zipper opening. All right, once you have the exterior out, just make sure you poke out those corners really well. And then take your lining and push your lining inside the bag. Now I'm going to keep that opening in the pocket unsewn until I'm done top stitching, because I like to reach in through the lining and push down on this top seam so that I can roll it to get it the way I want. So now we're just going to go along the entire top edge of our bag and just roll that seam so that the lining is on the inside and the exterior is on the outside, and just use clips to hold it in place. Alright, so even if you're not attaching hardware later to these side seams right here, this can be very, very bulky. I mean, I'm having a really hard time getting the lining to go behind the exterior. So to help with that, you can grab some sort of clamps, anything at all to help you smush this down. I mean, depending on the material you're using, this can just be very, very thick. So I just use this little key fob clamp, and I'm just trying to press this down. I know some people will also use a hammer. They'll cover it with fabric and then hammer it down to try to reduce that bulk. Just whatever it takes. So if you haven't already switched to a 90-14 needle, you might want to do that now, because this is a thicker layer, especially if you're using vinyl or anything for this top panel. And we're going to go around this entire top edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just top stitching it together. Once again, I'm going to wrap it around the arm of my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch with the exterior right side up. When you get over to these side seams, you might find it easier to just hand crank your needle past these instead of using your presser foot. You can always do that. You can always just take the side of your sewing machine and hand crank the needle and move this under the needle to avoid a needle break. So you're going to go around the entire top edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. that actually turned out pretty good. Like I said, I just go very slow over these seams. I know they can get so bulky. You just gotta go slow. So now I did backstitch a little bit at the beginning and the end, but I'm also going to pull the threads through to the lining panel. So I'm just gonna pull on these bobbin threads to get them back here. I'm getting that top thread to the back. Once you have them on the lining side, you can just separate them and tie them into a small knot, just 2 or 3 ties really. Since this will be seen on the lining side, you want to keep it nice and small. And then clip the tails nice and close to the knot. And if you feel comfortable doing it, you can grab a lighter and just gently burn the tails down so you don't really see it anymore. There we go. Okay, now we just need to close the hole in our pocket lining. So pull that pocket out. And since we folded it on the edges, all we really need to do is kind of tug on those sewn side seams. And the material will kind of fold down on its own. Now, if it doesn't fold down perfectly, that's fine. Just fold the raw edges in at least 1/4 inch. If it's more, that's okay too. We're just folding the raw edges in on each other so we have this nice clean fold on the edge here. Okay, once you have this all clipped down, now let's just go to the sewing machine and just top stitch right along this edge at 1/8 inch seam allowance. Just make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, there we go. Let's just tuck that pocket in. And then tuck the lining in really nicely. Doesn't this look so good? Oh, this bag is so cute. Okay, so now I'm just gonna attach the handles and then the hardware for my crossbody strap and I'm done. I'm actually not gonna do any more sewing on this bag. Everything is just done with hardware now. All right, so now grab those handles that you made and your bag and some sort of marking tool, and I'm gonna be using rivets to install these. So let's just do one handle at a time. What you're gonna do is you're gonna grab your handle, and if you have a top stitching that you want to be on the outside, just think about that now, because we're going to go from the front of the panel through the rectangle ring, and we're going to wrap the end around the rectangle ring just like that. So remember, this is kind of like the front and this is the back. We're going to have this end right here come up 2 inches. So grab your ruler. It should be 2 inches from the fold. So mine needs to go down just a little bit. And I'm measuring from the end of my connector down to where it folds here, just past the rectangle ring. I'm measuring 2 inches. All right, that looks good. Once you have it measured, grab some clips to hold this together. All right, so keep your strap straight while you do this with the other side as well. So I straighten it all the way out, and then I bring it around and insert it again from the top into that rectangle ring, and then wrap it around. When I pull my strap down, it should be a nice little curve like this, no twist. It's nice and straight. And then once again, I'm going to measure 2 inches from the end of my connector down to the fold where it wraps around that rectangle ring. All right, so that looks good. And then I'm going to clip it. Now, I'm going to do this for both of my straps before I rivet anything, because if one strap ends up being longer than the other, we want to address that now before we get it in there. So this is what it looks like. That looks so nice, doesn't it? I know the black strap with the white vinyl was kind of a crazy choice, but I think it looks great. All right, so I'm going to flip this over. We're going to grab the other strap and we're going to do the same thing. Okay, so I have both of my straps clipped in place, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take both of them and I'm just going to hold the bag normally to make sure one strap isn't significantly longer than the other. Okay, so when I hold this upright normally, it's perfect. These straps are the same length. That's great. So now I know I can rivet them just like this. So one at a time, I'm going to flip this strap back, and I need to figure out where I want to rivet this. I'm going to do 2 rivets centered on the back here. So using my little ruler, I'm going to measure about 1/2 inch down from the bottom edge of my strap end, and I'm going to mark a dot there, and then I'm going to measure 1 inch down and mark a dot there. And I think that will be good placement for my rivets. So I'm just going to make those marks on all 4 of my strap ends. And I am measuring 1/2 inch away from the outer edge here because these are 1 inch straps. So you just got to be careful here to make sure nothing moves around on you while you're doing this. All right, all of my little holes are marked. Now I'm just going to grab my hole punch and I'm going to punch them out and insert the rivets as I go. So I'm going to dump these out. And the hardest thing here is just keeping the bag out of the way while you do this. If you opted to sew, that's also going to be the most challenging thing, is keeping the bag out of the way while you sew it. Now do your best to keep the strap totally straight while you're punching these holes. Okay, so I have 2 holes punched so far. I'm just going to push this in there. So you can just push the rivet all the way through and then snap it on the back. And again, that's what's great about rivets, is you can just kind of snap them in there. And you don't have to press them just yet. You can wait, but it will hold everything together for you. All right, so this is what it looks like on the front. This is what it looks like on the back. I'm gonna continue this for all 4 of my strap ends. All right, I have all of the rivets pushed in there, and now I just have to set them all. So now I'm just grabbing my rivet press that has the rivet dies on it, and just gently go through here and push down all these rivets. And this is why I like using rivets for something like this, because I am not a strong top stitcher. So if I were to try to stitch a little rectangle to hold these strap ends in place, it just wouldn't look that great. But rivets, you have a lot of room for error. You don't have to place them perfectly for them to still look good. All right, there she is. This bag turned out so beautiful. So if you are not doing a crossbody strap, then you are done. Your bag is complete. It looks beautiful. However, I am going to do the crossbody strap, so let's walk through that and talk about it. So here are all the tools I'll be using for the crossbody strap. And let me just tell you, not all tiny screws and tiny screw holes are created equal. If you're going to buy these little connectors, I think that they're great, but sometimes the screws or the holes the screws go into strip very easily, which makes it very frustrating when you're kind of trying to really hold everything together and you can't get the screws to screw all the way in anymore because they're stripped. So if you can, go to a hardware store and try to find more screws like this just in case. Order extra of these, that's what I usually do. There's just not a ton of room for error here. You gotta kind of get it on the first try, which I know is a little frustrating, but I'm gonna show you how to use them. So let's start with one. So first thing I'm gonna do is unscrew it. This has a front, a back, and then 2 screws. Don't lose those screws. It's easy to do. And they're very short screws. So again, too much bulk in your material is gonna make it so that they don't screw into one another. So I'm gonna show you how this works. So you see this piece here goes on the exterior. It's gonna go just like that. And this back piece is gonna go on the lining. What it does is it wraps around the top of your material. The problem you're gonna run into is that material right here in this seam can be very thick. So we wanna get it as thin as possible. Once again, with these clamps, we can just keep clamping it down. Don't set this right here too low, okay? This piece here has to go underneath it. So you're gonna use this back piece to help you set your holes. So I'm gonna take this back piece and I'm gonna line it up over my seam, and I'm gonna try to center it as best I can. So ideally, when we mark our holes, we will not be going through the top stitching and we will not be going off the edge here, because it has to go, ideally you'll have the holes below the top stitching. I'm not gonna be able to do that because I do have too much bulk. So I will probably end up cutting my top stitching that's where the glue is gonna come in. I'm gonna glue in here as well to help hold everything together. But I'll show you. So I'm just gonna center this. I'm gonna grab a marking tool, and then I'm gonna mark dots where these holes are. And I'm marking on the vinyl. There we go. So you might be tempted to use an awl or a stiletto here to poke these holes, but see how thick, do you see how thick these little nubs are right here? These here have to go through the fabric, and they are not small. They're not screws. They are pretty wide, so you're gonna have to use a hole punch for this. So I'm actually gonna try a handheld hole punch for this, because this is a little bit hard to wrestle with my regular hole punch. So I'm just gonna line this up with the dots and just try to punch through all the material. So do this for both of your marks. All right, so now take your exterior part that has the little prongs in it, and we want to try to get those prongs through the holes. So flip it over and see if you can stretch your material around those holes. It looks so good so far. Make sure you get any of the fabric out of the holes. If some fabric got inside of the screw holes here, you want to get it out of there because it's going to make it really hard to get the screws in there if you have other stuff in there. So we're just pushing it through these holes. Here we go. Now we're gonna grab the back piece, and this needs to slide underneath the top bar of your outer piece. So you're gonna have to probably push the fabric down. You know, mine's all bunched up under there. What's hard is just that seam. That seam gets so bulky. So do your best to get it all lined up, and then I take an awl and try to find the screw hole. And then I'm gonna grab my screwdriver and my tiny screw, and I'm just gonna try to get one screw in there and locked. Okay, so that's good. So now I'm gonna work on the other one. Same thing, gonna try to move the fabric around so that I can get that hole open and then get a screw in there. Okay, so I'm not doing them all the way tight yet, but so far we're good, okay? You see, it's held on nice. I can pull on the back and the screws don't just pop off. That's great. So now, before we're completely done, I'm gonna remove one screw at a time. So I'm gonna remove one screw here. There we go, don't lose it. I'm gonna grab my beacon glue, and I'm gonna put a tiny dot of glue right in that hole, or on the tip of your screw, whichever one's easier. I have a really wide cut on my glue, so it's easier if I do the screw. There we go. And then I'm gonna put the screw back in place, and I'm gonna screw it in. And it is kind of a gluey mess right now, but that's pretty much what I want. I'm gonna screw it in all the way. There we go. Oh, thank goodness it stopped. It means I didn't strip anything. So now that screw is screwed in place and glued in place. So I'm gonna do the same thing with the other one. Just gonna unscrew this. You want to unscrew and rescrew as few times as possible, okay? The more you unscrew this and then screw it back in and unscrew it and screw it back in, the more likely you are that the screw is gonna strip or the actual hole for the screw is going to strip. So you don't wanna do this a whole bunch. All right, as tight as it will go. Here we go, clean off the glue. All right, that actually worked out really well. It doesn't normally go that well on the first try. So I'm gonna repeat that with the other side, and that is how I attach these little connectors on a finished bag for my crossbody strap. Now we can just grab our pre-made strap, and it has matching hardware. I know I did that on purpose this time. And just attach this, and let's see how it all looks together. I'm a little curious. Okay, so we've got the white, and we've got the nutcracker green and Christmassy colors, the black straps, and then this kind of black floral cross. I think it all works. So we have a lot of the same colors here. I think this looks fantastic. All right, so what did you think? What did you think? How did it go? Oh, I love how this one turned out so much. I love how light the vinyl is and then how dark and moody the fabric is. And of course, it's another like Christmassy bag. This is a nutcracker themed bag, which I love. I'm also loving the strap attachment because I don't know about you, but I'm not the biggest fan of building crossbody straps. I mean, if I'm in the right mood, then I can build crossbody straps all day long. But a lot of times, I really don't want to do it. So having a pre-made strap that I can just clip onto the bag, oh my gosh, that's such a time saver. So here it is, and again, I did extend that flap a little bit. I don't really think the flap needs that 1-inch extension. The only reason I did it in the first place was because I misplaced my snap placement on the pocket, and instead of rebuilding the entire pocket, I decided to just rebuild the flap and make it a little bit taller. But I think it gives it a nice look, but it definitely doesn't need that 1 inch. You can play around with size and placement of this flap a lot. I didn't show you this bag on in the beginning of the tutorial, so I'm going to show it to you on now. It's a pretty good size. It's not a really small bag, but it's also not a huge bag. So here it is, just with the shoulder straps. And again, you can make these longer if you want to, but I think the shoulder strap length is actually pretty great. And then let's look at it with the crossbody strap. So here the crossbody strap is, oh, I don't know if you can see. But you see, it hangs really nicely. This is how I like to wear my bags. I like my bags just a little bit lower so it's easy for me to kind of reach in and reach out, you know, when you got the kids and you got shopping and you got the animals and everything, you want to be able to just reach in your bag, grab what you need and go. I just love this bag so stinking much. It's so cute. So once again, thank you so much to Sew Your Patterns for allowing me to use your pattern in my tutorial today. It was such a fun bag to make. I hope that this tutorial inspires you to give it a try. If you do make this bag, please tag me in your photo. I would love to see your version. I feel like you can get so creative with this. You could definitely quilt these panels. You can make them out of quilt blocks. There's a lot you can do with this to make it really unique, but it is a pretty beginner-friendly pattern, which I love. So I hope that you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.